reopen the hearing into the Perth and Kinross Council Copath Lunc 124, stopping with diversion number 4 order 2021. Yeah, unfortunately, as said yesterday, Mr. Godfrey can't attend today, and what he proposed to do is go through his statement in some detail, because I know he would have wanted to speak to it. So made arrangements so he could be available. But there may be things from yesterday that people want to continue on or raise, so we'd start with that first. I think, Mr. Andrews, did you have a point you wanted to raise from yesterday?
Yeah, there are one or two things, please.
Yeah.
We haven't really got round to thinking about the environmental issues of noise and air pollution. So if I'm still thinking in that plan I have with the letters on, but the blue line heading northwards from Denmark Field.
Yeah.
It was said that it was going to be landscaped. Now, landscaped is a fairly vague sort of word. Bearing in mind it's going to be pretty close to an extremely busy road with a lot of extremely noisy traffic, and that the path will be at a higher level than the dual carriageway, if I understand it correctly. There's going to be a heck of amount of noise there for people walking that stretch. So what exactly have you in mind as landscaping to try and modify that noise effect?
Yeah. Mr. Elliott, would you like to bring somebody in on that?
I'll make just outline comments. Of course, Lunc 124, the end of Lunc 124 isn't landscaped. There was just really shrub around it. I wouldn't particularly call it a lot of trees around it. You have other ones, and I know going on to another one, but Lunc 102 in particular, you've had trees growing up either side, but there's an awful lot of gaps as well. But I think really the person to answer that as to the plans, I think Becky, I think you can answer as to what the landscaping is going to be. We have produced a plan within the papers. I appreciate interpreting plans isn't always the easiest, but there is a plan in the papers indicating what the landscaping will roughly be.
The key bit here, probably, if we're talking about landscaping proposals, it's the diversion section that's running to the north, to link into the Redgorton crossing. Excuse me. I think it's worth just giving a wee bit of context. So the air quality and noise models were undertaken as part of the EIA, and they used the traffic model that was created for the scheme, but also looked at that much wider regional traffic flows associated with CTLR and the predicted future growth from Lunc South, Bertha Park, Scone North, etc. And they produced a number of kind of plans that showed the typical levels you would expect for air quality and noise across the whole scheme itself. So I have plans that shows the levels and the numbers, etc. If we take air quality first, which is possibly just to deal with one at a time, the key problems of air quality in Perth are particularly around Athol Street and Bridge End. When you look particularly at the A9 corridor, the levels, the typical air quality levels, are actually fairly low. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. I appreciate that during certain times of the weekend, particularly Friday afternoons and probably Sunday afternoons, the traffic can be fairly stationary. But for the majority of the time, the traffic is moving and is fairly free-flowing apart from those congested times. So the levels there were sitting or were predicted, and that's over an annual average. So that's a daily air quality level, but they were sitting about 11 or 12 micrograms per metre cubed. Now, I know that sounds a bit technical, but the air quality objective is 40. So that's just to give you a feeling about where we're sitting with regards to the national objective. So you're about a quarter of the total objective. Whereas in Athol Street and Bridge End, you were exceeding those air quality objectives. So yesterday we talked about the premise of Cross-Tay was to remove that traffic from the city centre, redistribute it on the network and the new Cross-Tay Link Road. And what the air quality assessment concluded was you would get that reduction in the city centre, but that there wasn't any significant impacts on the wider network with that redistribution due to a number of factors. So I think the key thing, going back to the landscaping question, when you think about air quality, is that we're aware that there are some species that can help reduce air pollution, and there are some species that can make it worse. So the landscaping design and proposals have been put in place to make it a nicer place for people to walk, to connect the green corridors that we talked about yesterday, but there has also been consideration of the best types of species in that local area, what would thrive the best, what fits with the kind of native species that you would expect in that type of corridor. So from an air quality perspective, we're not predicting that there's any significant impacts on that A9 corridor or in effect the people using those paths as it stands. From a noise perspective, exactly the same type of process was undertaken, and there was a full modelling assessment done. Now, noise is slightly different, as you would imagine, and I think the key thing with noise that we have to take into account here is levels. So, because in the area that's going to be directed to the north, the diversion, Ross, I'm right in saying that the A9 is in a cutting at that point, so people walking are elevated above the A9. So that
generally that's the case, yeah.
Generally. So in a majority of these locations, that will actually work as almost a noise barrier, because the noise sound will be reflected off that cutting that it's in. The kind of levels and everything that have been assessed are all within the EIA, and that was assessed by the Environmental Health Department and others, that the levels would be of a sufficient level, basically, that there wouldn't be any significant impacts on people. I think the other thing to consider is the old A9 corridor that is going to be retained and landscaped and improved upon. There'll be a distance then between that core path and the realigned A9, which will mean there'll actually be a reduction in noise and air quality levels for users of that path.
Okay, yeah, I can take what you're saying about the air pollution, because I suppose you're going to be in a fairly exposed, reasonably breezy location. And as you say, the traffic is not stationary by any means a lot of the time. I'm still struggling with the noise thing. Leaving aside sort of technical requirements, it's indisputable that people walking beside that road at a pretty close distance from it and above the level of the traffic are going to have a thoroughly unpleasant experience from the noise. I mean, one hears traffic from motorways sometimes miles away. In this case, it's going to be a constant nuisance. It's not going to make a country walk particularly enjoyable. So I want to come back to my question. You said it's going to be landscape. Can you tell me what landscape means in respect of that stretch?
I think Denise can maybe come in here a wee bit more than in terms of the details, but in terms of landscaping, I believe what we're meaning is to put in soft landscaping, so trees, shrubs, hedgerows, and again, it's coming down to both biodiversity and reducing potential impacts. There have been studies done to show that if you can't see the traffic, your perception of the noise is lower. So with the A9 being in a cutting and the traffic not being on the same level as you, your perception of noise is less. But you're right, this path will be going along beside the A9, similar to the one that's existing on the other side just now. But we have set it back as far as we possibly can. Yeah. And also that kind of landscaping treatment is there to provide a soft barrier, if that's the best way to term it, and provide more of that countryside feel.
Would it be possible to put a raised bank along there between the path and the carriageways, so that I mean, a solid thing like that has far greater effect in deflecting noise away than a number of trees which will take years to grow. So if you had a bank with hedges along it and trees along it, that, it seems to me, would go some way to making the situation tolerable.
I think the problem that we've got is that any kind of solid bank or construction tends to be generated out of a need from the results from the noise assessment, which looks at requirement for types of noise barriers. To insert one now would require quite a lot of reassessment with regards to visual and impact assessments for any residential receptors located around there that would be affected by the bank. There would be carbon emissions associated with it as well, because you would need to source that type of material. And the noise models are basically saying that the noise levels are not requiring such a barrier. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't, the landscape design that's in there just now, that, there are proposals in there to try and make that a nice a walk as possible. But it is going along the side of the A9.
Just on the detail you asked about the landscape, and so for the length of the banking between Lunc 124 and Lunc 121, there is proposed a combination of wildflower seeding and shrubs and some woodland planting, some trees as well. The trees are towards the Lunc 121 end, and they are affected in terms of the extent of them. They're affected by an overhead line, but there is sort of shrubs and smaller trees planted around the 124 end of the cutting.
Yeah, I appreciate that would make it visually more entrancing than it might have been, but it still doesn't get grips with the fact of the noise, doesn't it? I mean, you accept it'll be noisy, and it really would be a significant obstacle to try and create just even a low bank, would it? I'm surprised.
Mr. Elliott, did you want to mention something?
Well, Mr. Andrews has posed a direct question, so I think either Denise Ritchie or Becky McLean can answer that, and then I can come in after that.
Okay.
The confines that we've got, Mr. Andrews, are what's consented and what's not, and what would be seen as material variations or not. And I suppose the things that would need to be considered is, even for quite a small bank, how much material would you need? Where would it be sourced from? How would that affect that landscape and visual aspect? Would you have to go back and consider? And going back to what we were talking about yesterday, there's kind of planning and regulatory regimes that we would have to fit into, which can take quite a bit of time, potentially delay the process, and there's no guarantees that you would get it through. So I know it sounds like it would be a fairly simple change to make, but once you're through that planning process, it does make these things a bit more difficult. And I suppose going back to the noise assessment and the air quality assessment, these were all looked at as part of the planning permission in terms of what mitigation was required, and it didn't highlight that it was required in this area.
We also say we're also quite constrained with the land available for the scheme there. I don't think you would have any extra room in there for creating a bund, because obviously you would need that. You need to displace the path further into the adjacent private land, which we don't have.
Well, it's a pity that wasn't thought of in the first place.
Yeah. Mr. Elliott, did you?
Yes, thank you. Just to confirm that the document we lodged with the landscaping in PKC 15 is the plan that we lodged. That indicates the landscaping. But then just to offer, it is just an observation, and it's referred to Mr. Andrews' Strava map as to confirming this, and I knew this anyway. But it's Mr. Andrews is obviously concerned about the impact of noise of people going up that diversion. But it's quite interesting that Lunc-2, the two paths that appear to be the most used of the lot, Lunc-2, perfectly understandable. You go down the River Tay, very pleasant, particularly at the top level. But also, one of the most used is Lunc-102, which is the one that goes right down from Denmark Field, right down the side of the A9. And in a lot of parts is even closer to the A9 than what the diversion would be. Now, I'm sure we could come up with explanations why. I think it's because it's possibly the direct route down to Perth as well, and it's tarmacked. But it is interesting to see that observation that it's a well-used path in its own right, next to the A9.
I accept that. That's perfectly true. And the vast majority of that use is by cyclists, because it's a cycle route out of Lunc into Perth.
Okay.
I would just like to kind of make the point about the kind of noise buns and the noise protection, in that we did go through a process, and where there are noise sensitive receptors, i.e. households that are affected, we have done that throughout the scheme, and there is noise mitigation provided throughout the scheme. Obviously there hasn't been noise mitigation provided for Path. That wasn't something that was considered during the EIA, which has been through and now has approved.
Yeah, it's sort of mentioned longer term. We're supposed to be using moving towards electric vehicles, which is silent. I think is a problem because they're silent, and also the pollution levels are low. So I don't know how electric engineers feel about how that will impact longer term on this matters of noise and air pollution.
I think for the CTLR EIA process, we had a long discussion with the environmental health officers at Perth and Kinross, and we're obviously very aware that electric vehicles are coming in, and the Scottish Government have made a commitment that there will only be electric vehicles by a certain year. But to try and predict the worst case, or to make sure that we weren't predicting too overly a positive case, we've assumed the existing car mix just now, which is obviously predominantly petrol and diesel. So what was shown in the EIA was very much kind of a worst case scenario of what's there just now. I completely agree. I think from a future perspective, once electric cars become more of the norm, that the noise levels will naturally reduce and the air pollution will reduce. We are aware that air pollution won't disappear completely. You do get particulates from the brake pads and the sheer motion of cars over the road, but you don't obviously get your exhaust emissions. So it does reduce and it will make a difference.
Okay. Any other points anyone wants to raise following yesterday, Mr. Andrews?
Could I possibly go back to what we were talking about in terms of alternatives? Because having taken on board and overnight thought about some of the points made by the council, there's one other idea I wanted to see if might be acceptable. Would that be okay?
Okay, yeah, just go ahead.
I'm asking you now to try and visualize the plan that we started with those letters on. What I'm wondering is if in the area around Redgorton, where we had the paths joining the carriageway points C and E and so on, whether a way of helping to solve the problem for people at Redgorton and the buses, and also making the diversion proposals safer, would it be possible to put an underpass under the new carriageway just south of where it diverges from the existing one? You're doing works there in any case. The ground levels would not create the sort of problems of possible flooding, it seems to me. I'm not an expert, but on the railway side, the land drops away in any case, so I don't think you'd have that issue. That, since you would be doing work starting to create a cutting, might that not be an inexpensive option, which would be much safer than the crossing at point F?
Will I take that one?
At least you're thinking about it, which is encouraging.
You can take that one.
Yeah, thanks, Denise.
I can just confirm you're talking about just south of Lunc 121 then at Redgorton, an underpass there instead of at Denmark Field, as we were discussing yesterday.
Well, I still hold the fact that I think a bridge ought to be built, but
Yeah.
I'm just looking beyond that, because if my view is not sustained, then I think I want to try and see how we can improve things to avoid the at-grade crossing that, however safer it may or may not be at Redgorton. So I'm wondering if, setting aside the issues about Denmark Field, from every point of view, for the people living in Redgorton, and for walkers who are going to be diverted north to cross there and then south again, whether an underpass there, given that you're going to have to undertake works, might not be a way of meeting the government's strategy of removing all the at-grade crossings, killing two birds with one stone.
Oh, that's what you were meaning. I was just double checking that.
Yeah.
Yes, it is actually similar from an engineering challenge point of view. It is similar to the Denmark field location. You have ground which, as you say, on one side of the E9 is falling towards the railway, but on the other side of the E9, the ground levels are rising, hence the cutting that we have there. So you would be having to dig down a long way to get down to the level you need to for the path to go under an underpass. You would also have to provide extensive retention structures coming out of the underpass and long ramps to get down there, all taking a lot more land than we have available. So we have similar challenges that, yeah, again, drainage would be a challenge with the water levels, the water table being where it higher than the surface of the path. So it's very similar actually to Denmark field for constructing an underpass.
I'm surprised because the ground level slopes up, but pretty gently there compared with the deep cutting you're going to create at Denmark field. I'm not the engineer.
Quite deceptive. If you walk down the path 121 from Redgorton down to the A9, you're dropping quite a few metres there from the Redgorton level down to the A9 level. There's going to be a relatively substantial cutting there, John. It might be difficult to envisage, I think, but there is quite a substantial cutting just at the tie-in point where our realigned A9 ties in with the existing A9. There is quite a level difference there. I'm sure Denise can pull up a level difference given time to look at the drawings, but to me it's quite a substantial level difference. And the other thing I would want to highlight is at that point, it's probably even more difficult because you've got less room between the railway boundary and the A9 there. The railway boundary, there's not a hell of a lot of room between the boundary of the railway and the trunk road boundary there to squeeze anything in on the east side, which makes it quite difficult.
Well, what I was suggesting was you would go underneath the new carriageway. So there'd be plenty of clearance away from the railway side. But anyway, I have to accept what I'm told because I'm not the expert in this kind of matter.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Andrews?
Not for me, no. I think that's
Okay.
anything I wish to say.
Anybody else who's attending? I've got everybody's picture. No. Shall we move on to Mr. Godfrey's statement? Plus, I just want to deal with his statement relating to this order today, and then reconvene tomorrow afternoon to deal with the other three orders. I'll just read through things. Mr. Godfrey submitted a hearing statement for the four orders, and I only intend to deal with this one today. He's also submitted details of his habitat survey work. I think it'd be helpful if I summarise his submission. He's provided a witness biography which explains that he's been a resident of Lunc for 31 years. His career started in Edinburgh, working 2 years for Registers for Scotland and 6 years for a solicitor's firm. After working with environmental organisations, he joined the council as a ranger in 1989, proceeding to the post of countryside officer of the council, a post he held for 10 years, which involved work associated with core paths and the footpath network. After retirement, he studied woodland in the area, producing study reports which are distributed to the council and other authorities. He refers to the achievements of Thomas Graham, who was the MP for Perthshire, work he carried out in the area. And Mr. Godfrey also carried out survey work in 2020 and 2021, adjoining the banks of the River Tay and into the woodland along the River Almond as a recorder for the Botanical Survey of Britain and Ireland. The majority of the survey work included Corpath Luncarty 2 and identified 163 species for the section within which the Tay crossing is to be made. The statement goes on to refer to the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003 and the Scottish Government's policy on the control of woodland removal, implementation and guidelines 2019, as well as Section 208 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act. He refers to policies in the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan and the use of Scottish transport statistics to estimate vehicle generation on the local roadway network. That's his introduction. I'll just fill in the
Can I just interrupt a moment and say, please, I'm familiar with Alistair's paperwork. I've read it all, so I don't think I have any further need to be involved in this. So if you would excuse me, and I'll just say thank you for hearing me. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Andrews, for your contribution.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so I'll go on to Mr. Godfrey's original objection letter. And he started by saying that the orders had not been advertised sufficiently. And particularly, I think it was about when he walked the area, he couldn't see many notices posted on the car path and right away. I know the council responded in writing to this. I don't know if you want to add anything, Mr. Elliott, on that. It's posting notices.
The anecdotal, well, notices were put, the simple fact is that notices were put up by the end of the affected pass. Now, I can say anecdotally, I was walking the routes in June, which was after the time, June 2021, which was after the time period for objections, because that was kind of early April to early May. And the one I distinctly recall seeing is the notice at the very bottom of Lunc 124 was still up, which was next to the A9. It was on a pole. I think it was a metal pole. I think, you know, it was quite prominent. So I can confirm that was done. It was these notices were put up on all 6 paths orders, because 2 have been confirmed subsequently. They were put up by a countryside ranger. Mr. Tubbs will confirm the name. It was Rachel Bauer, I think was the name. You're on mute, Dave.
Our ranger Rachel Bauer put up the site notices for I think for all of these.
Yes, and I will say I have a photograph that I was given a photograph of an example. Now it relates to one of the good ones. It doesn't relate to Luncarty ones. And it was it's the same terms of notice that was put in the Edinburgh Gazette and Courier, with one exception. After the link to the council website, there was a QR code put in. Now, I'm not technically minded, but essentially, if you scanned that QR code on your mobile, it was then going to take you directly to the council website. Of course, if you're out walking, you don't necessarily have a pen and paper to write things down. But the QR code will allow someone to then take themselves directly to the council website at that time during the notification period. So I can confirm that notices were put up by countryside rangers on all of the affected paths.
Thank you. Right. So specifically to his comments on this order, he talks about confusion between the drawing for this order number 4 and the drawing for order number 3. The latter showed retention of the core path right of way for most of its length. But for order number 4, the drawing shows retention and diversion for that same length. The drawing for order number 3 shows this as a new path not connected with construction of the Cross Tay Link Road. As you say, whether the public would stop crossing the A9 if this route was stopped is a matter that requires further consideration. The drawing is also deficient in identifying the relationship to the stopped off section of the A9. There's in principle consent for the Luncarty South development to deliver 50% of the road development. A new bridge crossing will be required in the vicinity of Denmark Field. Options are set out in the 2014 report to the council on this. How this additional crossing might affect non-vehicular use of Luncarty 124 and in particular Lunc RT102 on both sides of Denmark Field, including the section to Lunc RT, must be taken into account at this stage and not left until later. The order is deficient in several ways and should not be approved as presented. I'm not confused about the mention of a bridge crossing. I'm presuming that would the cross Tay bridge, would it, Mr. Elliott?
He does mention bridges, but I'm trying to think where he put it in, but it was latterly, but he actually mentions a couple of bridges that are not within CTLR. I think he's meaning he talks about a couple of existing bridges being inadequate and not fit for purpose. And one of those, I think, is the flyover between Redgorton and Luncarty. I'm not sure what he means in terms of the other. So I'm afraid that's as much as I can say. I don't know if anyone else can add in, but there was a lack of clarity. I wasn't fully understanding what bridges he was referring to.
Anybody else? No.
Is this we're talking about his most recent submission for the hearing? Yeah, not his objection.
That was his first objection.
His first objection.
Yeah, which I will have the council's written response to that anyway. So
yeah. Right. So he's talking about a new bridge crossing will be required in the vicinity of Denmark Field.
Yeah.
I think what he's referring to there is the Luncarty South development has a requirement to provide some sort of linkages. They're allowed to build a certain number of houses. I couldn't quote a number. I need to go and look at what the number is, but I think they're allowed to kind of 50% build out, and then they've got to provide some sort of linkage in. But that's on the developer to provide that. That's not something that the council is providing as part of CTLR. So I think that's what he's referring to. Obviously, I can't speak for him, but that's my understanding. Is that what he's referring to? So it's a kind of separate issue for how the developer's going to maintain access into Luncarty South. So all we've done with our scheme is make sure we've designed our scheme so it doesn't preclude the developer being able to do that. It's really a solution that developers got to come forward with, and it's a problem that they've got to solve should they want to do the full build out that's potential in that area along Luncarty South.
Okay.
I think that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, I'll just move over to his main statement that he's put here. Right. Yeah, so it starts by referring to the justification statement. Description of stopping up and diversion. Lunc RT124 is a farm track that runs from the A9 up roadside up a slope between fields and alongside woodland, following the track through into the B8063 opposite Merthley, Redgorton, Mans and other properties on the way. The route is shown on the Ordnance Survey 1 to 1250. 1 to 2500 scale, 1944 to 1970 series. It was surveyed or revised for this area in 1966 with publication in 1967. Realignment and dualling of the A9 in the 1970s cut off the end of this track. Its terminal point equivalent to the south bank carriageway of the current A9. The current layout is shown in the appendix of some photographs that is included. This is an inheritance from the Roads Authority in the 1970s, criticizing anyone trying to cross to Lunc RT124 to Lunc RT102 and vice versa should look to the severance created by the Roads Authority. In considering this order, the severance in the 1970s and reduction of freedom of movement must be recognised. Traffic on the A9 with associated noise in our area has risen considerably. There are now 3 million vehicles registered in Scotland, the ratio of 1 to 1.82 for every person living in Scotland. The previous programme, proposed programme for the A9 demonstrate how road problems or constraints are not addressed by road construction. The council proposal is to stop at Corpath, Lunc RT124 and divert it along a new route to Lunc RT121 for 596 metres. pedestrian crossing from Luncarty 124 to Luncarty 102 at Denmark Field will not be provided. In order to reduce the number of pedestrian crossings, and these put in inverted commas, it's been agreed with Transport Scotland that only one at-grade pedestrian crossing of the A9 trunk will be provided as part of the cross-tailing project. This is to be safer, improved at-grade pedestrian crossing facility at the Redgorton bus stops on the A9 trunk. This location was chosen as it's more frequently used, approximately 100 per week, and the location of the informal crossing between Luncarty 124 and Luncarty 102. If it's where, and then he goes on to say, this is where confusion arises because there are two crossings of the A9 for Redgorton. One connects to Luncarty 119 to the north, the other to the A9 footpath adjacent to the southbound carriageway and Lay-by-Wood bus stop. And SUO-340 124 stopping up briefing note, figure 3, proposed Redgorton crossing, identifies a new crossing slightly above the current crossing near the end of Luncarty 121. The crossing is shown on the image in the appendix of his photographs. If this location is to continue, what is the future for the other crossing? So he's saying that I think the crossings are staggered at the moment, and he's saying what would be the future for the other crossing. I don't think we can answer that one.
If I could
That
step
one?
in. Yeah, could I say, Denise, I think my interpretation of what he's saying is he's actually talking about a crossing which is to the north of the new one that the council will be constructing. That's out with the effects of the CTLR scheme. I think that's the one that connects Luncarty 114 and Luncarty 119. Shouldn't all be part of the order. That's my understanding, but Ms. Ritchie will be able to answer that.
Yes, that's correct. It's also my understanding. There is a further crossing to the north. It's out with the extent of the CTLR roadworks. So that's why it's not in the order.
So that one goes through, it looks like it goes through a section of woodland on the western side of the A9 at the moment.
It's Lunc 114, yeah.
And then zoom across the carriageway to get onto the 119.
Would it be safe to say? Sorry, Ross.
Yeah, and there's an old railway crossing there, so it's a kind of old back over an old railway crossing when it goes over 119, I believe. Yeah.
So
Would it be fair? Sorry, fair to say, Ms. Ritchie, that I think I'm correct in saying that essentially that's not within CTLR. So effectively, the future of that is the gift of Transport Scotland. It's they're going to be their decision. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With our remit. Just maybe worth further clarifying, when I was reading Mr. Godfrey's statement, that certain parts of it read as if our proposed crossing was at the same location as the other existing crossing. There is a slight difference in the position of it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'll keep stopping when I get to a point where you sort of raise an issue. Then says, having used the A9 frequently for over 32 years, I've never seen either crossing used. Council estimate of 100 users per week is not credible. There are 28 residential properties in Redgorton. The council's figures suggest an equivalent of 3.5 residents from each residents crossing each week. Most properties in Redgorton have at least one car. So we did sort of touch on this yesterday, but I don't think anyone wants to comment on. It's less than to get 100 users, isn't it? Which, yeah.
Just, I suppose, just to confirm that survey data that we were talking about yesterday. So the surveys that were undertaken was back in April 2018. It was done by camera, so it physically recorded people using that crossing. And at the Redgorton, let me just double check I get the number correct, but at the Redgorton crossing, which was location 2 in our EIA, after a week it was 106 people crossing. And I think it's important to recognise that that doesn't assume that every single person using that crossing is coming from Redgorton. or is going to Redgorton, I suppose in the sense that it's a core path and it could be used by the much wider community as well, that just physically records people using that crossing. It doesn't stop and ask them obviously where they've come from. So that's where those 100 users per week, the figure has come from.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but maybe helpful, of course, the other figure, which is within our statement of case, for the Denmark field crossing, the informal crossing, that was only 6 in the week. What you don't have in your papers is very interesting, and we just discovered this recently. The crossing between 114 and 119 we've just been talking about, that's higher up now with the effects of the scheme. That was location 1, I think, Becky?
Yep.
And it was also subject to the same count, and it was 146. So it gives you an idea that there is very low usage down at the informal crossing at Denmark Field. There are more people crossing up at Redgorton. Obviously, you've got the bus stops and you've got the link into Lunc as well.
Sure. Point of clarity going back the way, Lunc 119, the old railway crossing. That's a bridge over the railway. It's not a level crossing or anything like that. There's a safe bridge over the railway.
Yeah, I did see that when I did my inspection, actually. Yeah, thank you. Right, so I think the next is mainly a statement. It talks about the A9. So the photograph in his appendix, crossing on the A9, demonstrates 2 cars in parallel travelling at speed. Several vehicles were observed breaking the speed limit. The stopping distance on the A website for a vehicle travelling at 70 miles per hour is 96 metres, equivalent to 24 car lengths. A vehicle in the inside lane can obscure a vehicle in the outside lane. Vehicles tend to get bunched up at traffic lights. This alignment continues later in the journey as observed at this location. What might be seen as an empty road and soon fills up. Northbound traffic is also obscured by the dip in the A9 before this crossing. There's no room for misjudgment in using this crossing, and the consequences would be horrific. It's not a safe place to cross the A9. So he talks about alignments there and dips in the road, etc. So anybody like to comment on that? Oh.
Yeah, I'll comment on that one.
Yeah.
And just about the dip, there is no dip in the proposed northbound road profile on approach to the crossing point. The levels fall towards the crossing point for a couple of 100 metres at least, so there isn't a dip. And the visibility, a pedestrian crossing from either the east or the west side of the A9, or indeed in the central reserve, would be visible for the full visibility distance in the design manual for roads and bridges. So they would be visible to someone, a driver along either the northbound direction or the southbound direction on the A9.
Would you expect that to be an improved visibility at the crossing then, in either direction, compared to what it is at the moment? Or similar?
Similar, I would say similar. I couldn't hand on heart say that it's definitely an improvement, because we are called upon to look at what we're proposing rather than what's there at the moment. So we didn't have to do that detailed assessment.
I think what you could say, correct me if I'm wrong, Denise, so is at the moment northbound traffic approaching is coming up, so there is, when you look south,
yes,
at the northbound traffic, it's coming up.
Yep.
So that'll be the kind of dip he's referring to, i.e. the A9 drops in level as you look south. But what we'll be dealing with is we're lifting the A9 to get over the Tay crossing. So at the point where we're crossing over the Tay, putting the new CTLR in, the A9's kind of getting lifted and coming through that cutting, isn't it, slightly? So there's going to be a kind of difference in level there. Would you agree, Denise?
Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So there is a difference in the levels you're looking at, rather than looking at the land falling away from you and the road falling away from you. You're looking at it, rising up as you look away towards the south, to try and put it in kind of layman's terms, if you like.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so continue. Then it then goes on to the statement of reasons, and it quotes the council. The proposed diversion will repurpose the use of the footpath by diverting it northwards along the west side of the realigned A9. The proposed diversion will connect to the footpath Lunc 102 and the right of way, and is not part of this order, and will connect to the crossroads at Redgorton. And it says if this diversion is not part of the order, its inclusion as a diversion is not competent. In any case, what is proposed is not a new diversion, it is a new route connecting to Lunc 114 and Lunc 121. My understanding is that the right of way diversion is subject to a separate order, number 3 order. Mr. Elliott, can you comment?
I think perhaps this has come about. I'll take a step back. He talks about confusion. Now, in the order, there is a statement of reasons, which isn't actually the operative part of the order, but it's just explaining very simply what the changes are. Now, there is an error in there, and I'll hold my hands up because I drafted it. And unfortunately, when you're drafting 6 orders, there was one error. And it refers to linking to 102. It's not. The link is to 121. So I think that's where some of this has come about.
Right.
But you then, sorry, to go on, you mentioned about the right of way in number 3. Number 3 is 121. There are 2 rights of way here. Of the 4 orders, 2 of them are both core paths and rights of way at the same time. So the order will cover both, the status of both. Now, off the top of my head, that's Lunc 2, which is the West Bridge PR. And yes, it's Lunc 121, which is the 3rd order. And it's relevant to the order we're talking about, Lunc 124. Lunc 124 is just a core path.
Yeah. And
I think he's referring to the kind of the green that's included in the path. Colin, which you recall, we included that as it's not part of the order. It's shown for information purposes only.
Yes.
I think that's quite clear in the drawings that we provided.
Yes.
We're not claiming it's part of the order. He's saying this should not be part of the order, therefore the order's not competent. But we've never claimed that's part of the order. It's for information purposes only, just for context and clarity. Yeah.
It is, yes. And Mr. Fletcher makes a point that we did debate when doing the plans, and it's impossible to do a plan that will satisfy everybody because everybody looks at things in a different way. But what we tried to do on Lunc 124, you've got the red bit for the stopping up and the light blue for the diversion. And then we tried to show some of the linkage, the new paths, etc. in green. But the trouble is when you look at a different plan, Lunc 121, for example, the colouring changes. So you've got green for the diversion of Lunc 124. On Lunc 124, it's light blue, but on Lunc 121, it shows as green. There was no better way of doing it, frankly, and that might be where some of the confusions come in as well.
yeah, I can look at the plan. I can see that the first point is marked green, new path provided as part of the enhanced public access within CTLR project, information only. Yeah, so yeah. Right. Changed. So for the Time and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997, this can only apply to stopping up at the end of Lunc 124, because it's the only part affected by the development. Then it goes into a conclusion. Right, page. And again, coming from the council, given the above and all the circumstances of the order, it is the position of the council that the order should be confirmed without modification. Nothing that's been raised by the objector suggests that the order should not be confirmed. Stopping up and diversion of core path Lunc 124 is necessary to enable the development to be carried out. So that's council's statement. And it says the conclusion contradicts what I pointed out. The order is only competent for the stopping up of the section shown in the order. There is no actual diversion. This part of the order is not competent and should be dismissed. So, Mr. Elliott again.
Yes, not entirely sure what he means by no actual diversion. If you look at the Lunc 124 order plan, as I just said, the red bit's the stopping up, and the light blue bit is the proposed diversion. Now, I think what he might be saying is, getting into the necessary test. As we discussed earlier, it's not absolute necessity. It is necessary in the circumstances. And as I say, I think the approach here is you start from the stopping up element. The A9 will be moved across, so you've lost that part of the path. And as a consequence, we could have stopped there. In fairness, we could have stopped there and said, stop up, end the story. However, that would not have provided any, better, greater linkage. You would have lost that part of the path, and you get benefits from diverting, of course, up to the north as well, as we've said with the loop. So it's necessary in the circumstances to do the diversion as well. I think that's what he's meaning, but that's the best I can say. But certainly it is both competent, as the Act allows, the Section 208 is both competent to do a stopping up and a diversion.
I think at one point, maybe later on, he asked whether that diverted route would be designated as a core path.
That's the purpose of the order. The order will divert. It's not simply, this is more about, the orders are really not physical, they're more about the status of the path. And so therefore you're stopping up, the core, Lunc 124 is the one to think about at the moment. You stop up an element, so that core path will stop where we've indicated. And yes, it will then be diverted. Now, automatically, something not before you, but I think it's in the Land Reform Act, if an order is granted under Section 208, it automatically then changes the core path plan. There is no procedure to go through in the core path plan.
Thanks, that explains that. Right. The next part he talks about a document that's been lodged with the DPA and extract from the Council's local development plan, and this is MU168 north of Perth Park and Ride and general employment uses. It goes through all the requirements that are set out for that mixed use proposal. As the council makes much use of its LDP2 and planning consent in justifying the Link Road development for its orders, however, it makes few references to environmental impacts. Is the thing I think it is making. Then goes on to a new NMU 168 on the Crossdale Link Road in relation to Lunc 124. Lunc 124 views from Redgorton Ridge looking southeast. He's put a photograph in to show those views from Corpath to Bertha Wood, across to Skunk Palace and beyond. And this demonstrates, if it was the impact on Lunc 124 from the Park and Ride and employment land outlined in orange on the council's LDP plan. And then talks about the views shown on images in the appendix that he's put in. Then talks about former Reverend of Redgorton, parish minister, who said few panoramic scenes, perhaps are finer than that which is seen from Redgorton Ridge, which commands a view of Skone Park and Palace, of the bridge and city in Perth and the fertile valley in which it stands, with the mighty tracing rolling through it, wherever the sweeping of the ground or opening of the woods where it's to reach this channel. And if as the view remains much the same, except for felling in Bertha Wood. It's as if the site-specific development requirements for the previous proposal I mentioned were applied to the Crossdale Link Road, it would fail miserably. There's been much tree removal besides the A9. The image in the appendix of photographs included provides examples. It's got woodland clearance beside the A9 with Lunc 124 in the background in front of the line of trees. Various other images. Roxy Hull Fort was a prominent feature from Lunc 124 until the archaeological survey began. Huge quantities of soil have been moved and the feature will ultimately become part of the Crossdale Link Road. And he talks about the origins of Redgorton as a settlement, and its founding really related to the hill fort. Says the Crossdale Link Road will transform the rural landscape south of Lunc 124 into the busiest transport hub on Perth's doorstep. With the A9 rail line between two roundabouts, the quiet setting will be transformed by constant noise. The possibility that street lighting over the pub at night will be visible locally. This will add to the considerable light pollution already visible from Garty to Bigben Green. Probably worth just sort of mentioning lighting as he's raised that. I don't know if there are any particular proposals for lighting for the bridge and the realigned route.
Only the roundabouts are lit, but I think it's worth highlighting that all these points are really there's CTLR general points that were considered in the plan application. I wouldn't say any of these points are relevant to the code path order that we're here to discuss. Happy to answer any queries. He's raising concerns about woodland clearance and archaeological investigations. I'm happy to go over what's going on with those issues, but they are generally related to just the CTLR scheme and not the code. He's deviating quite far away from the core path issue here, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I think as well, it's worth noting that the kind of requirements set out for the Bertha Park and Ride scheme, he's saying that if you compared that to Cross Tay, it would fail. However, all of those things have been done as part of the planning process. So the tree surveys have been undertaken. Design of the road has been done with advice sought from landscape specialists and archaeology specialists to try and minimise the impacts as far as possible. Where trees have had to be lost, we've got mitigation plans in place to compensatory plant for those, but also to go over and above that. And things like the ancient woodland soil translocation scheme that's been done as a trial and things is to try and compensate for the loss that has to be required. So I agree. I think a lot of these wider issues are the ones that have been dealt with through that planning process and with the significantly sized EIA that was required to make sure that all these things were considered. I think my final point on that is that the Bertha Park and Ride scheme, although the area is outlined in the LDP, it will have to go through all of the planning regulatory hoops that you would expect. So again, it's design, siting, impact, consideration of connectivity, etc. We'll have to make sure that it meets all the various requirements at the same time.
Yeah.
Five pieces of that. I was actually at the very point my colleagues have stepped in and said that all of what you've just read, or virtually all of it, is really relating to the CTLR planning application for permission was granted. It may be important to know that Mr. Godfrey was an objector to the planning application. And my view is much of what he says relates to going back to that rather than the order, which is for 124. My colleagues have mentioned that the tree removal has been mentioned, but may be important to note, well, of course, there are no trees affected by the orders. There's trees affected by CTLR scheme, but these are paths. The trees are not on the paths, they're to the side, and a lot of it is elsewhere. And the last thing is that Nature Scott and Scottish Forestry did not object to the planning application. As Becky has said, there was agreed compensatory planting. The other thing is impact on views. In planning, technically this is a planning authority decision for the orders. There's no right to a view, but I think we accept there's going to be an impact on views, but it's been minimised as much as possible.
Yeah. And I could add maybe just one other thing. To be fair to Mr. Godfrey, I think there was a bit of confusion caused with regards to tree clearance. And again, this is general CTLR scheme rather than specific to the core path. But to be fair to Mr. Godfrey, the Bertha Wood, the landowner jumped in and cleared the trees at Bertha Wood. And it was purely a commercial decision I think he took to make sure he took the trees down before we took ownership of the land, so that he was getting the money for the timber basically. So he nipped in quickly and took down trees, as Mr. Godfrey refers to in 2021. But that was not the council. It was nothing to do with the council. He went and got permission separately to do that. I think that caused some confusion for Mr. Godfrey because he assumed that was the council doing that for CTLR, because the landowner referred to CTLR been on the horizon in his agreements with Scottish Forestry to take those trees down. So there was a bit of confusion caused by that, but we did clarify that separately with Mr. Godfrey, who had submitted an FOI on the subject, I believe. So yeah, it's just to kind of clarify that there was a separate issue that perhaps caused them some confusion with regards to the tree clearance.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, his next section is about tree removal from Perth Wood. So yes.
Just to add to what Ross has just said, so in terms of procedure, the landowner had got a felling consent through from Forestry Commission, and a completely separate consent to anything to do with CTLR at all. We did actually speak to Forestry Commission about it to make sure that this wasn't something that we needed to be involved in or aware of. It was very much a separate procedure between the landowner and Forestry Commission, and it's their consent that he's used to go in and fell those trees.
Okay, thank you. I think at some point you mentioned where the new bridge is going and the felling there, and whether there'd been a particular species survey before that felling took place.
There's been full tree surveys carried out across the Cross Link Road project area, and also protected species surveys were done during the EIA preparation, and have also been done recently prior to the contractor going in to do any tree felling. So the landowner has taken down Bertha Wood, but the tree felling associated with the contractor, they've also carried out the full suite of protected species surveys that were required, and that was part of the planning condition that was attached to the CTLR consent. So the contractor's been fulfilling those requirements.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, there's a side issue here. Maybe Mr. Fletcher can explain as to why there has been some tree felling recently, some advanced works. My understanding, or either Ross or Becky, my understanding is that the reason that there has been some advanced works is because if you didn't do it in the non-nesting season, you'd have to wait a year, as you might be familiar with, Mr. Seddon, with other planting appeals, etc. You have to wait a year. To wait a year would have a big financial impact, so they were done recently.
Yeah. I mean, we've structured the CTLR contract to have a 1 year early contractor involvement period, which is designed to allow for these things like advanced works. For example, we're doing the archaeological investigation just now, and we've done the site clearance, which is good practice to de-risk the project and make sure we can do all these environmental surveys in advance and make sure we've got plenty of time to do the site clearance and do it at the right time of year and get set up to be on site in the summer, basically, when the main works are going to be kicking off. Yeah. I think Mr. Fraser's had his hand up for a wee while there.
Yeah. And clearly, given Mr. Godfrey's done all the survey work and flora and habitats and everything, I wonder if I know it's general again and not related to specifically to this order, although it maybe in some ways you've said a little bit more about translocation and what sort of species you intend to put into the landscaping schemes, given that you can see along the Tay corridor that the vegetation there is fairly unique, sort of mix of species, which clearly Mr. Godfrey's done surveying. So I wonder if you'd like to say a bit more about what sort of species you'd be using in this scheme and the rest of the scheme, really.
Yeah, no problem. I saw Mr. Fraser had his hand up. I don't know whether you want to come in, Mr. Fraser, just now before I answer that question.
Sorry, it's maybe not an appropriate time because you've moved on slightly. You were talking about or mentioning the fact that the views over the Tay had come up for discussion, and indeed I was up 124 taking in that view just a couple of days ago to give me some idea of positioning. Perhaps Mr. Fletcher's the one to answer this. The I won't call it a mast, the tall post, metal post with the locator on it, which is immediately west of the excavations, the archaeological investigations Is that in a particular, is that just a convenient place for that GPS to be, or is it at a particular point on the realigned A9, or indeed the junction at that point? Can you give me some, just to better understand, where we're looking at?
Yeah, so you're talking about, you were walking up Lunc 124. Are you talking about the telephone mast, the mobile phone?
No. Looking from there down towards where the junction at the west end of the CTLR will be, and at the moment you've got the archaeological works dig going on that hillock, if you like. Just before you reach the Broxy Kennels property, and immediately to the right of that, to the west of that, you have at the moment a post, quite a high post with I think a GPS thing strapped to it. Has that position of that got some significance? I'm trying to relocate myself there. So I'm looking down from 124 and I can see that post there. Is that a significant point, or is it just a convenient point to put the GPS?
I think that's just a convenient point out with the works at the moment to put the GPS. I think what you're referring to, I can't swear on it obviously because we're not looking at this plans or photographs or anything like that, but I think what you're referring to is the weather station that the contractors put in. I think, judging by what you're saying.
Sorry, I assumed it was the civil engineering thing.
Yeah, well, it's to do with the contract, yes. So I think what you're referring to is the weather station that's put in there, and that records weather conditions. So if there's any issues with adverse weather, etc., there's mechanisms in the contract. If the weather gets to a certain, rainfall gets to a certain level, and there's emissions, all those things, to allow us to deal with that contractually if the contractor's due extra time, etc., depending what weather conditions is encountered. So that's what that's about. But in general, that'll kind of dictate the kind of, if that is what we're talking about, then that'll dictate the kind of western edge of the works, if you like. So if you're looking at that, that'll roughly look where the edge of the kind of western roundabout earthworks is going to be. So if you're looking at the view, then that'll give you an indication of where that junction's going to be. But obviously that's all caveated that I'm understanding you right, and that we are talking about the same thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Seddon.
Thank you. Yeah.
Back to your question, Mr. Snedden. So I will answer the query with regards to the soil translocation and some of the wider things we've looked at from a CTLR, and maybe if my colleagues can bring up one of the landscaping plans to show the kind of mix that we've looked at. When we went to speak to SNH about the tree loss at Bertha Wood, and we were asking them what we could do in addition to the compensatory planting, they'd ask us to go away and have a think about different types of proposals. Based on a technical note prepared by the Woodland Trust, we were aware that there's the growing view that ancient woodland soil has an important seed bank within it, and that there's few instances in the UK where a soil translocation has been undertaken to see what would happen. Basically, from reading through the Woodland Trust technical note, you cannot be sure what will grow, and what they've indicated is that actually what grows doesn't really bear much resemblance to what was there just at the last time when the trees were taken down. Actually, species can come through that you haven't seen for quite some time. So we agreed with SNH that this would be a useful trial for this project to see how that would happen, what would come back. So that's been done at Bertha Park. Now, part of the kind of requirements for that type of trial is that you try and move it as close to possible as where it was, so that you've got the same kind of hydrological, geological conditions, so that you're not moving it into a completely different area so it doesn't fail. So the contractor is well on with that, and they're fully on board with that, and that's something that's happening. And just now we're looking at maybe speaking to some universities to see if we can get some kind of scientific research to be part of that. One of the other things that we've agreed to do is actually to provide a betterment and enhancement to the Perth Lade, which is slightly distanced from 124. So apologies, it's not in the same area. But when we went to speak to the biodiversity officers at the council, it's something that they've had great aspirations to do for the last 10 years or so, but limited funds. So the contractor is going into an agreed section of that river. They are clearing out the river. They are removing any invasive species. They are replanting native species. They are clearing up the path. They're removing anything with graffiti or anything that makes that an unwelcome place to be. And that part of that river upgrade, if you like, is to allow the green and the blue networks in that area to start to operate in the way that they should do, to kind of regenerate, but provide a nice place for people to walk as well in that main area in Perth. And again, part of that is about the wider benefits of CTLR and providing benefits for wider communities in Perth, not just in these particular areas. I think, Denise, I don't know if you've managed to get the landscaping plan, but the landscape mix that has been proposed and has gone through the EIA process has been something that's been designed by our landscape design team, which has taken a view on what is there just now, what should be removed, what needs to be added, how can we enhance the overall mix of the local area, but very much with a focus of non-native species and I believe wildflowers as well. But I'm just hoping Denise has a plan that we can tell you exactly some of the species.
What I've got, Becky, is, I'll just take a snapshot of it. I have the plans, the landscaping plans don't actually have the species broken down on them. So I've got the...
I've got the scope here,
report.
Denise, if you want. I've got the kind of
Yeah.
list and the scope of the different ones that are there, if that's any use.
The compensatory planting proposals mixes agreed are in this report. So if I put this into the chat, I think this is the right one.
In discussions with S&H, a lot of the kind of better value was making sure what we were putting in was obviously native species, but also managing what is there as well just now. So trying to retain as much as what we've got and improving upon it on the basis that you get far better values from improving existing woodland and existing habitats than completely getting rid of them and trying to start again from scratch. So there was a real focus on native species, on diversification and kind of linking into the Perth and Kinross biodiversity action plans as well that list their kind of key species.
Sorry, ignore the one I just sent. This is the...
That's trees, isn't it? That one, yeah.
This is the one. If you look at the second one, Becky, that was the species mix that was discussed and agreed with Nature Scots.
Yeah.
As compensated planting for the Perth Park Woods specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of kind of steps that have been put into the contractor's requirements as well. So there's obviously the planting of these compensatory woodland areas, but then also there's a kind of a timescale of maintenance as well. So if any of these species fail or, that they are replaced and maintained to give them time to properly establish before the contractor kind of relinquishes any of their...
Yeah. Okay. I don't. That was pretty much most of the comments from Mr. Godfrey. Will you be sending anything in writing, Mr. Elliott, at the end of the day?
I would need to discuss with my colleagues, but at the moment, from my perspective, I think we've covered it in this hearing, but we've still got the other 3 hearings to go as well. I have to admit, I only covered Lunc 124 last night in terms of thinking about things. So we'll see how we go. But as much as I can say at the moment is I will discuss this with my colleagues immediately when we're finished the hearing sessions, but it may be we don't need to respond. The fundamental thing about Mr. Godfrey is most of it relates to CTLR, not to the orders.
Yeah. I think I said at the start, I really just wanted to deal with this order today. So I'm going to reconvene tomorrow at the appointed time. Which will give you time then to go through the other orders if you're not give them responses to the orders anyway. So that's the kind of call.
Yeah. Can I clarify? You said something earlier on. I think you're getting on to it. Tomorrow afternoon was only originally set down for Lunc 2, the first order. Is it your intention to deal with all three? There was going to be Thursday afternoon and Friday morning. Now Mr. Godfrey's not going to be present. It may well be we can do things quicker.
Yeah, I'd intend to go through 2, 3, 4. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, in that order, and just continuous. Okay.
Is there no? I mean, I'm just floating the idea, but is there no merit in just continuing on today, or is that?
Yeah, I thought about. I mean, so I've not heard from Mr. Godfrey.
All right.
It's likely he's going to be available, I think, but just in case, I think we'd better stick to the program.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately for Mr. Godfrey, we had organised it so he could have been available in the afternoon tomorrow, but he couldn't be available in the morning originally. That's why the times were as they were. But I think it's probably best to stick to that. And I think we'll give Mr. Elliott a bit more time to go through the other three orders. So you know, rather than rush through things today without that additional preparation. All I need to do now, I think, is go through very briefly the other objectors' cases, which are very similar sort of wording to what we thought was. If for some reason the order wasn't confirmed, what would be the practical sort of effects, particularly at the crossing at Denmark Field in terms of the project? What would be the result of that?
It is a hypothetical, and of course, it would depend on the terms of actually the decision as much as to where we would go. So it is quite hard to kind of hypothesize. However, if you take it from the stopping up element, if you think about the stopping up element is needed to realign the A9. And it would be very blunt. If you don't get the stopping up element, you don't realign the A9. And I appreciate that's very blunt. I'm struggling to see any way around that. The diversion is maybe a wee bit different because, of course, you can still realign the A9 provided you've done the stopping up, but that still means granting the stopping up. But I think the easiest way to say it is it would be potentially very fundamental consequences to the overall project.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Okay, well, so to go through one point I got as I go through these, Nico, I've got the council response on one of his objections. I think it's dated November. I don't think I've got the original objection from his organisation. No, whether you could check that for me, Mr. Elliott, probably today sometime. And then
it's within your papers. You should have it. I'm looking at. All right. Okay. PKC 29 is the original objection, I think.
Right. Okay.
We responded, which is PKC 30, and a short response from Nick Cole on behalf of the Access Forum is PKC 31, and that was just maintaining the objection.
Yeah.
It's a one-page letter. Sorry, the original objection, PKC 29, is a very short one-page letter. Really similar, significant detrimental effect to the existing path, requiring users to go alongside A9 for a significant distance, renders network insufficient for the purpose of giving the public reasonable access, which, as you might know, is the Land Reform Act, not the Town and Country Planning Act we're looking at. Failed to recognise public entitled to use and cross the A9 on foot, and then simple matter of either an underpass or suitable bridge. Really what's raised in there is what we've all discussed yesterday. It comes down to what the Access Forum is saying is that's a long detour, there should be a bridge or an underpass, and we've covered those issues.
That's pretty much my note. That's what I'm saying. So, yeah. So that's there's a Kinross Outdoor Access Forum. We got it.
Maybe helpful to know that Mr. Andrews is a member of the Access Forum as well as Mr. Roberts, although they've objected individually.
Yeah. Got So some hesitation at the moment. Especially the Perth and Kinross branch of the Scottish Green Party. Their comments. They talk about the basis for the order which we discussed quite early on under the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act. Absolutely sort of only be justified if the council can demonstrate it's not possible for the creation of diversion if effect arose to take place unless core path and Cartier 124 is stopped up and diverted in the manner proposed. They talk about alternative ways the bridge can be constructed or the reline section. Sort of an underpass. Also be considered by the traffic control, crossing. Sure it's safer than the consumer Redgorton. So we've pretty much covered all those aspects. Felicity Graham, Perth Living Streets Group. He talks about the statutory basis for the order. Support for a bridge and underpass to that Denmark field, which again we've covered. Scottish. Again, Sarah Walker. Accept the need to remove the flat crossing the dual carriageway pedestrian, cyclists, horse riders, and any other non-motorised users, providing that a usable alternative route is implemented. And rather than the diversion being built in another direction, if you was to extend Lunc 124 south to link into that roundabout and pedestrian cycle path on Costay Link Road, would only pedestrian cyclists over the Rite and the Liberty. So again, it's matters that we've dealt with, yeah.
Could I add an extra matter that hasn't really been covered from, and I'm pressing from the council's perspective, and that's the overall importance and benefit of the development, because it's ordered to enable the development to be carried out. And of course, that means to an extent looking at the development. And of course, from the council's position, we've set it out in the statement of the case. This is a critical part of infrastructure to be put in that benefits the wider community. It's a public benefit scheme, both in terms of air quality and traffic congestion, particularly in and around Perth. But it's wider than that, because what it is for the sustainable economic development of the area. Frankly, we end up in a great deal of difficulty if it doesn't go ahead, because of the impact on housing and employment land, which we've kind of set out in the statement of the case. So I think it's felt that it's not really been discussed, and I can understand why. When you're looking at specific orders, it's sometimes you lose the overall picture. But certainly from the council's point of view, it's a very important aspect of these orders is the overall benefit and why this is being done.
Yeah, thank you.
I think just to add to that, Mr. Snedden, in terms of legal planning, those developments that Mr. Elliott was mentioning about are actually embargoed until the cross-tay is, I think it's either in construction or it's completed. So their whole planning consents and everything are relying on it as well.
Yeah, it's linked to the air pollution in Perth, central Perth, isn't it?
Yeah. So basically, what one CTLR is, there's a term within the LDP. So essentially, once all permissions are in place and the main construction is commenced in CTLR, then a lot of these embargoes are lifted.
Yeah. Scotways, they go through criteria they use in order to determine whether diversion is acceptable. Diversion should be at least an equivalent standard, should not be significantly longer, should be no less convenient, accessible to at least the same categories of user, access taker as its use at present, available for use before the present route becomes available. That they consider that the order would reduce connectivity and functionality of the access network by creating alternative and not equivalent provision.
Just on that last point, Mr. Seddon, those criteria that they're quoting there are about orders made under the Countryside Scotland Act. So had we made the diversion orders under the Countryside Scotland Act, that has much more to do with the management of the right-of-way network, those criteria that they're talking about would be more relevant. Obviously, we're making these orders under the Town and Country Planning Act, and the tests are about necessity.
Thank you. Generally, again, we dealt with most of their comments. Mrs. Brown. Should say there are more people walking, cycling the core paths around Lunc due to the pandemic and enjoying the local recreational routes. It's one of my favourite routes. The cross-tail link bridge to help take pollution away from the city centre of Perth. And in your proposal, we would have to inhale extra fumes due to a proposed closure of this section of the core path. She talks about an underpass or overbridge being made. So again, this morning we talked about pollution and noise, environmental effects. I think pretty much covered everything now there that I need to, unless there's anything else, Mr. Elliott, I think I need to cover. But
I think there's one topic, and only one topic, that comes off my head that I know Mr. Fletcher can address, which is footpath mitigation works. It's in your last bullet point.
Yes.
During construction. So maybe Mr. Fletcher could address that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's no problem. So we're talking about the temporary case. So we would never promote orders for temporary diversions of core paths and such like. But what we do is we always include to make it incumbent on our contractor within the contract to make sure they maintain access as much as is reasonably practical. Which in this case we should be able to maintain the core paths for if not all the time, the vast majority of the time. And the contractor is currently in discussions with Dave's team and the local access officers, and they're pulling together some proposals. And that'll all be built into the contractor's construction environmental management plan and the various other plans for the works. So they're pulling together the strategy for that just now. But generally, there'll be temporary provision made, and there'll be programming of the works at certain times to make sure that we maintain access as much as is possible during the works. So it's just to say that that's ongoing. Obviously, it's completely impractical to create orders for these. I know a couple of objectors expected there to be orders created for temporary path diversions, but I mean, anybody that knows anything about construction works would realise that the process, the time scales you need to go through for each individual path order and the changes that happen on a construction site is absolutely impractical to do that. So we'd always just do that through liaison with Dave's team, and then Dave can come in and kind of comment on that. I'm sure after I've just finished speaking, but yeah, that's as far as I'm made to aware that the team's quite happy with the way BAM are approaching that at the moment, and they're just drafting up the strategy just now for the kind of main works kicking off in the summer, as I said, and that's the point at which most of the core paths will need to be considered, and that access will need to be maintained, and the temporary diversions, etc., will need to then be agreed and communicated to the local community.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Stubbs.
Yeah, I did want to just come in briefly on that, Mr. Fletcher. I did have an initial meeting with one of your colleagues about this just a couple of weeks ago. I suppose my concern was the core paths that we're stopping up and diverting in front and centre. I knew they would be addressed. I was keen to be sure that BAM were going to scope in the other core paths in the area that might be affected, and they are. So I'm awaiting proposals from BAM on that, but I was reassured that we're very much on the same page about scoping in all of those paths rather than just the ones that we know we need to permanently divert.
Yeah, it's a general requirement for within their contract scope for any core path that's affected. So even if it's affected by a whole route, for example, in the periphery of the site, then they'll have to come up with some mitigation to make sure that can be safely accommodated during the works. That's just an example.
Okay.
Just coming back briefly on that, another advantage we have is that most of the well-used routes in this area are core paths, so we know about them. I suppose there's a possibility there are routes that we haven't considered, but we'll look at BAM's proposal and see if we think that's going to be adequate for this, for the temporary arrangements, because obviously it's going to be construction site and it's going to be some months, and people's patterns of access will be disrupted for a chunk of time. Very keen to get that right.
Yeah, I was going to mention, presumably you'll feed this back to the local community because the ones will be directly affected. So
Yeah, like
etc. Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, there's meetings commenced already with local community groups. So we've set up a group for the east side of the Tay and a group for the west side of the Tay. So wherever the core paths are, these kind of things will be communicated through those groups. So yeah, that's all well underway at the moment.
Thank you. Right. So unless there's anything else, I think we probably can.
Can I just go back to the previous point, literally just to give you an item of information that I've had checked in the background when Mr. Andrews was asking about the underpass at Redgorton. I just wanted to have a colleague check what the level difference was. So just for the record, it is approximately 5 metres between the verge level there and the track level in the field. So that's what's affecting the extent of engineering works that would be required to achieve an underpass there. You then have to go down another 5 metres to get under the A9. So it's a lot of excavation.
Yeah,
large footprint.
I think my understanding was he was looking at slightly further south than the actual crossing point as it is now or will be. So
Yeah.
they thought it was a bit more level, less of an operation, a construction operation lower down at Captain Slough. Okay, anything else for anybody at all? No, well, yeah, thanks very much for all that information. It's my job to prepare a report now, so we'll end the hearing today, and come back tomorrow at 2 to go through the 3 orders. I think the other reason for doing that is that some people do sort of watch the virtual presentations anyway, so they would be anticipating possibly that would happen. So thanks very much, and we'll see you tomorrow, and it will just be the council really, and see if Mr. Godfrey can attend, but I think nothing I don't at the moment. Okay, so thanks very much, and I'll end the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye then.
Bye.
Bye.
Cool.